So today on the show, we have Alex Shore. Alex is a co-founder, managing partner of a company called GridVest. And what they are doing is enabling the adoption of batteries to, very interestingly, a middle market that they feel like is extremely underserved. So as he describes it in the episode, in the very high level world of batteries, there's residential applications, per house, smaller, easy to deploy. He says on the bigger side, there's utility scale applications. And what he says is apparently those are pretty easy to do, given they're for a very specific purpose. And you can turn them on and off at will. And so there's a middle section of that world that's very messy. Includes, people developing buildings, for example, or running factories or industrial applications and things like this. A lot of different use cases that make it very complex, and there's no solution to make it easy. So not only does Alex have a very interesting perspective, deep knowledge about batteries and the energy market as a whole, but GridVest is building a very interesting solution to these people left for dead in the middle. So it was very educational for me, inspiring. I know it will be for you as well. Thank you as always to our sponsors, Clean Tech Growth Lab. If you're looking to grow in clean tech, they're the people to do it with. And the producers of this podcast, Craze and Friends. And with that, I give you Alex. Oh, welcome to another episode of The Grove. Shout out to the sponsors mentioned just before we got started. Without them, it would not be possible to interview awesome people doing awesome things like Alex. Welcome.
Hey there. Thanks for having me.
That's right. We're going to get into how you are leading, and this is me. After the research I've done, you guys are leading a really significant change in how energy is distributed. Saved, dispersed, used, things like this. So before we get into all that, if you could give a brief introduction of yourself and what you're building.
Yeah, sure. Thanks for having me again. I'm Alex Shore. Right now, I'm the managing partner of GridVest. We are a battery storage equipment distributor and financing company. So what that really means is we're selling big 20-foot containers of batteries, and we're selling them to installers and construction companies who are building the renewable energy projects that are using those batteries. So usually it's paired with solar or wind, oftentimes connected to a building as well, so that it's providing backup power and helping reduce electricity bills, and really also just right now helping the utilities because the grid is so overloaded. So batteries are kind of become the saving grace. So we're trying to just make it easier to access the batteries, to pay for the batteries with financing, and then also just technically figure out like all the intricacies of permitting and fire codes and just the changing technologies. It's like every year it's a new battery technology and it's a new policy landscape.
Yep.
So if you're out there trying to build these projects, it is really hard to keep up. So anyway, that's what GridVest does. My backstory before that was spent 9 years in China. So I started my career in finance, but realized pretty quickly that I wanted to focus more on renewable energy and climate related. At that time in 2010, 2011, we weren't even using the word climate. It was more like environmental
Right.
initiatives. And I felt like, all right, well, if I want to go somewhere to work on a big environmental challenge, where would I go? And obviously, China comes to the top of the list when you look at how much coal they were using and still use. They're still the world's largest user of coal, and then having this opportunity to kind of disrupt that and be a part of the change in China. So I went there in 2011, started a renewable energy business called Cedar Clean Energy. We were the first companies in China to use rooftop solar PPA financing. So it's kind of a unique financing structure to finance solar energy. And from there, we grew our business and scaled, for a number of years. And then anyway, COVID brought me back to the U.S. and had a crazy 9-year journey there. And that's really where I got my entrepreneurial kind of DNA, really got to put my entrepreneurial skills to the test, kind of being in a foreign country, starting a business, raising money, navigating like world world dynamics between U.S. and
Yeah.
China. And so happy to talk more about all that journey. But that's kind of what brought me back to where I am today.
Oh, when you were baby Alex, were you looking around saying, "I can't wait to start a company," or did something happen in your
Um,
life right around then where you said, "I want to be an entrepreneur"?
Good question. I think I'd always had that kind of like entrepreneurial spirit. A lot of luckily I grew up around a lot of entrepreneurs. So my dad, my aunt, pretty much all of my uncles, and which are three uncles, and really four uncles, and who are all one by marriage, and who are all entrepreneurs,
Nice.
and then just kind of thinking about what I wanted to do. I was always interested in like I don't know the maths and the science side of things, but I never really was excited by like the I don't know. I like the application of things like real things that
Mm-hmm.
you touch, and I just felt like yeah, business and entrepreneurship was kind of that intersection of like doing cool things. Some element of like the future and technology, but more about how to actually just like make things work. So I've always been in the all of my businesses have been in that messy middle about taking like a technology that's just one or two steps too early and figuring out how to make it
Yeah.
kind of scalable. I've never really been great at taking something that's really mature and then like taking it, like growing that. More,
Sure.
I'm not as good at the incremental growth, but I definitely feel like where I shine is in that sweet spot where it's like just early enough, but it's still like it's still messy, it's unsexy. There's a lot of
Yeah.
education of the industry or the market, but you can see that like if you figure out these things, wow, what's possible. So I think that kind of I don't know, maybe there's just this connection to meaning and purpose that has driven me from probably since like my college age. I wouldn't say it was before that. I was really that focused on it. I think earlier on in life I was more focused on just making money, I think. But
Yeah.
pretty quickly after traveling the world, like around a bunch of cool places and just seeing what I don't know what matters a little bit more, I think that's where I started saying, okay, how can I if I'm gonna have to work for a long period of my life, how can I do something that I actually feel good about? I like
So,
businesses that you can the more you do, the more you sell, the more you make, whatever, the more good it's also indirectly
right.
doing. So it's just like it's not as much as like it's not really an impact business as much as it is just like a business that's solving a real problem that people have.
Right. And yeah, at the same time, solves a problem that makes money,
Yeah,
but it
exactly.
does
So you
like
can do
end up
more of
doing
it.
good.
So,
So, and was that 2011 company the first company that you'd started then?
yeah, I technically started one. So the real story is that when what landed in China, I started a consulting business with two other guys who
Nice.
had been in China, and we were bringing clean tech companies into China. So it was like a
Sure, sure.
clean tech market entry company called E8. And that
Cool.
was kind of my first foray into starting a business. And I got really lucky and partnered with a good friend who I went to college with, and then a Belgian national who'd been like kind of an energy executive who had taken some time off and wanted to start a business. So I had some good kind of like let's call them like mentors around me who were helping me kind of figure out
Yeah,
how
yeah.
to actually navigate China, how to start a business. Though I think it was more just the willingness to try. I was 24. I was like, I had like nothing to lose at this point. Like, I basically decided, do I invest in myself or do I get an MBA? And I decided, all right, let's
Right.
invest in myself, try and
Yeah.
do the learning by doing. And worst case, I learned. So that was my strategy and just like allowed me to take some big risks and be overly, and also being young and naive. It's like, oh, yeah, of course I can go to China and start a business. It's so easy. And then, of course, you get into the realities, and it's so much harder. But then the progress, even if it's incremental progress, you're like, oh, we just did so much better this year than last year, and it's like we can do even better next year. And
Right,
I
right.
got a little bit into that trap of like, and that's why I stayed 9 years. I kept thinking it was going to be 1 or 2 years, and then it kept pulling me back.
No, that's great though.
Pulling me.
Well, so something interesting that came of um an interview slash a series of interviews with this company called Clean Tech Group that I did at the beginning of the year. In particular, I had a conversation with Anthony Diorzi, who also spent some time living in China,
Yeah,
and he spoke to they look at like a super macro level, so they're gonna their perspectives really high up. But it was interesting to talk to him about his perspective of the difference in what environmental tech, clean tech, climate tech, whatever, what it's like for that to develop in China versus the US, not only given just very objective, different regulatory structures and how policies are different and how that encourages market development in different ways, but also cultural differences in how people even approach entrepreneurship. So, given that you spent 9 years in China, and given that you've now been building GridVest in the U.S. for as long as you have, what has your personal experience been as an entrepreneur in those two countries?
Just the difference between the two, or is
Yeah, yeah. Anything notable about
yeah.
being an entrepreneur in China versus here?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think it's interesting because it's just they both have changed and are changing so much. So like what I say today actually may not be true in 3 or 4 or 5 years from now.
Mm.
Um, because when I got to China, being an entrepreneur was like really looked down upon. It was like no mother in China wanted their child to be an entrepreneur. It was like a negative thing, right? And that was 2011. And then all of a sudden, you have this tech boom and VC money and all this stuff. And now, of course, in China, it's also equally as I don't know. I guess you could say sexy if you want to be an
Sure.
entrepreneur and attractive for young people, and parents are very supportive of it. And still lower risk. I guess the big difference is that there is a level of like in general, the average level of risk tolerance and the tolerance for failure, I think, is still not quite where it is in the U.S. There's a lot of reputational concern, and they call it face or mienza. Like, you just don't you don't. The risk of a failure is scarier, I think, in general, if you're in China than it is in the U.S. And I think because there's a little bit, I think it's just culturally, there's just a little bit more acceptance of that in the US, and you can, you fail fast and fail, and you can kind of still, you can fail up, right? Like there's a lot of failing up in entrepreneurship, which is not a
Hmm.
bad thing, right? It's like, oh, I had a big blow up, but maybe there's some other opportunity, someone else who wants to pull you in because you had experience in a certain way that they thought was interesting. So I think that's a big one is risk. I think the other is about speed. So like, in China, one of the cool things that I'd say is actually better is like China speed is a real thing. Like things can happen. It's harder, I think, to get things off the ground there. Not off the ground. That's I said. It's harder to like scale things there because it's kind of like a winner take all market where like you're either kind of like it's like you're either getting a huge chunk of the market or it's like you're kind of they're gonna eat you for lunch. But if so that's a hard part. But the other part is that like the speed of things is so amazing that like if you can just find that wave and ride it, it's like the growth rates I've seen are just astronomical for a number of businesses. Even
Interesting.
like back in the day, I remember like bike sharing when it first came out. There's companies like Mobike and Ofo and all these companies that were like, we're bike sharing was a really cool thing. You rent a bike, scan a QR code, and grab a bike.
Yeah.
And like in like 3 months, it was like every city, everywhere, all
Oh my God.
it's like and then they were like all beating each other up for who can raise more, and then they ended up. A lot of times, what happens is Chinese companies end up merging together because they're basically killing each other so quick with just overspending that they realize the only path forward is to join forces, and that's what
Interesting.
like
Yeah.
a lot of the biggest companies in China are mergers, including like
Cool.
Didi, the Uber of China. But so that's a big difference. But back to like the practical like day to day, I think the individual journey, I think, in the US is a lot more fraught with red tape. That's the other issue that I've found is like the paperwork, the regulations, the permitting, the rules basically. And frankly, the rules are more enforced in the US. So it's a lot more difficult to just be scrappy at the
Mm.
beginning. Whereas in China, you can kind of just start anything pretty easily with a very limited budget needed, very limited legal costs. Like the amount of legal costs in the US are pretty wild. Hopefully being
Yeah. Yeah.
disrupted soon with AI. But yeah, like that's a big difference. Just the speed at which you can just like put out an MVP and try something out, and like you don't need to have all the things lined up. And there's more room for gray area there. So that
Yeah.
allows you to kind of start and then figure it out and get your permits and then figure out how to be compliant. Whereas in the US, I feel like it's much more important to have everything lined up at the beginning, which means you also need some funding, which means it's
Right.
harder to start a bigger business, obviously.
Right.
So those are a couple of the big differences. I think in general, though, there are mergers.
Great.
Like it's kind of the world is getting flat, right? Like what the entrepreneur experience in the U.S. and the entrepreneur experience in China is definitely becoming more similar than it was before. And I think it's becoming more global. Like Chinese investors are now looking at the U.S. as a real market, even with all the political stuff going on. And Chinese entrepreneurs
Interesting.
oftentimes will move to the U.S. just because they think maybe it's a better funding environment or maybe it's better for their business, even though they might be at a disadvantage being, not from the U.S. Um, and I advise a company that's actually basically founded by foreigners in China, and they're kind of trying to they have a they're navigating a difficult balance between how do you take advantage of the best of China, which is like the R&D and the
Yeah.
speed and the funding and the government support, but also how do you take advantage of the West, which is really good at commercializing technologies and
Right, right.
the VC funding for like more hard tech future technologies
Interesting.
and a little bit more risk taking, I think, outside of China too, where like Chinese investors tend to want to see like, you know, things are a little need to be a little more fully baked before they're willing to put in as much money. Whereas in the U.S.,
Right.
you can get a $40 million Series A on an idea if you have the right people and team. So it's not saying that doesn't happen in China too. I just think it
Sure,
happens in the
sure.
U.S. more often. So it's an
Cool.
interesting time. It's all kind of converging.
Nice. Well, I just think it's such a cool and unique perspective to be able to have that much insight in two very different places of the world,
Yeah.
and two places that are extremely relevant to the industry that we're talking about, which climate tech, clean tech, whatever word you want to throw on
Also
it. So
also the future of the world. Let's just not forget that.
yes, yeah, just generally speaking, you're right. So then it brings us to the end of your journey at China and the beginning of journey at GridVest. How did that happen?
Yeah, it was pretty wild. I went to so 20, everyone has their COVID story, but I went on vacation in 2020 for Chinese New Year, January 2020. I left go to New Zealand. Got to arrive in New Zealand and they put me in a special line and I didn't know why and they told me about some virus that had broken out in China and I was like, oh, that's interesting. And then, fast forward 3 weeks later, all the flights were canceled to go back when I was supposed to go back. So I couldn't get back to China. Stayed in New Zealand for another month to figure out what I was going to do. I was either deciding to stay in New Zealand, which was very tempting, and I kind of sometimes wish I had,
Hmm.
or move back to the U.S. And so, because I couldn't get into China, and I wasn't really
Hmm.
interested in going back there at that time. So anyway, moved back to the U.S., reset my life stateside, started over with literally like a backpack, because everything I had was still in China, and and yeah, it was a fun journey of figuring out what's next. I did a little stint at WeWork, which is a kind of an in between part of my journey. I was running B2B marketing for them. So I kind of wanted a real job to help me have a soft landing,
Right,
but also
right.
to apply my skills in different ways, figure out what was going on in the market in the U.S. And just it was a really interesting time at WeWork because they were going their whole rocket ship up and then
Mm.
kind of implosion back down. But it was a really fun journey to be a part of. But then in that time, I kind of was still involved in my business in China, and still kind of figuring out what was the application of renewable energy in the U.S. So I was kind of like, let's call it market research time. So I spent all the time there, and then once I left there in 2021, I basically took a year off and just like gave myself 1 year to figure out whatever it was that I wanted to do next, and didn't my run rule was like I can do whatever work I want to do this year. I just don't have to work. But I didn't want to like rule out working either. So I ended up, which was kind of cool because I ended up getting pulled into a bunch of projects, consulting
Hmm.
stuff. Like I was advising climate tech startups. I got pulled into that climate tech, advising a climate tech company I mentioned earlier. It's in between China and US. And anyway, so through that, I started getting my kind of like feet wet again in the climate world. In the startup world, I was helping some people raise funding. And it was a really exciting time with a lot of that time. There were a lot of checks being written and big climate tech valuations, and it was pretty wild. Uh,
Was most of your work in the energy space?
so yeah, I kind of after that first journey, man, my first two businesses all in energy, I kind of decided that like, I really want to work on climate related issues,
Hmm.
initiatives, and energy is the sub vertical that I think I have the most, let's call it, experience and value in. And also I just think is the most challenging. If we can solve that, I think it solves so many other problems. So I've
Hmm.
always been like energy focused with but like a soft circle around climate environment. That's kind of how I define the work I do. And it's helped me because it's like otherwise, even that is such a broad focus as it is. But if I didn't have at least that target, like I'd be tempted to go into everything else, from like
Hmm.
an AI to Bitcoin. I'd be like following everything, because it's
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
so exciting. But at least that lens gives me a little more like, you know, I don't know, objective mission and just clarity of
Sure.
like what I want to do and should do, and it feels. And then again, back to that point earlier about the more you do, the better I feel, the better it net for the world.
Right, right.
I definitely see there's huge economic opportunities too. It's not just for that. So, um, but just to get back to your question about, and then the last part of my journey was just I did end up doing a climate policy fellowship at the Aspen Institute, and so that was a
Cool.
really cool program. That was like a 3 month program. They pay you to essentially learn policy and become a policy expert of some kind. Well, not expert, but as much as you can learn in 3 months. And yeah, so that was really a great way to say that was the one area, policy was the one area I'd never really tried in terms of like moving the needle on. And I
Hmm.
felt like, well, now is a good time with everything going on in the world to learn about how to shift policy. So that kind of opened my eyes again to battery storage. I got access to a lot of data sets and developers and just meeting people and realizing the same thing that happened with solar in China, with the cost curve coming down, deployment going up, government supporting it, businesses needing it, like economics of projects becoming really attractive. I saw the same things happening in battery storage, and yet the technology was still a little early. It was still a little expensive. It was still a little hard to get access to because it was all made in China. It was still a little hard to get permitted because it's very few applications have been deployed, and fire departments hate it, and it's scary. And so I was like, oh, this is exactly like the problem that I can solve because it's again 1 or 2 steps away from being market ready. It's like clear that it solves so many problems for the utility, for increasing
Yeah.
renewable energy, for buildings, for resiliency, for home like individuals who are dealing with expensive power bills and EVs. If we're ever going to use EVs at scale, like you're going to need batteries to support the grid and support your charging at home. And so anyway, there was like a million reasons, and I was like, yeah, this is the area I want to work in. And then I got really lucky, and someone from who I had known from the past emailed me out of the blue saying, "Hey, I'm interested to do something in renewable energy, and I like and kind of as an investment." And I was like, "I've been looking at battery storage, and I have some ideas within battery storage that maybe we should talk about." And so anyway, we ended up teaming up, and that's became my business partner, and he's the majority owner of GridVest. And Yeah, it's been a great journey working with him, and we've gotten to kind of explore a lot of cool ideas. We looked at early on. We looked at acquiring some companies that were like early stage that we could like take on and then maybe grow. And then we realized that actually this model works well because he's an asset-based lender by trade. I'm this kind of climate, like energy sourcing and deployment and financing. And so we kind of teamed up where he liked batteries as an asset. So he was comfortable lending on the batteries. I had all the network of sourcing and knowledge of how to deploy the
Yeah.
systems. And so that's the story. That's how we kind of came to GridVest, and that was 3 years ago. We actually set up the business. We'd been working on started about 3.5 years ago, technically, but yeah. So it's been a pretty cool journey. In 24, 25, and 26, each year we've kind of doubled our business.
Nice.
And Yeah, so that's been exciting, and it's been not it's not like hyper growth in the sense of like we're raised millions like tech VC money and we're going to go scale a platform, but in terms of when you're moving big heavy 20-foot containers across the world,
Right. Right.
it's that's a growth rate that I'm happy about. And
Well, so I think that perspective from the policy work that you did, which is interesting that you went from doing that to understanding the market in a sense of saying, "Hey, this is a solution that could really help this particular market grow in the way that it is." So, from that perspective, could you lay the foundation of what battery storage, energy storage, what is the space that we're talking about that you guys are operating in?
yeah, so I think like this space is it's unique. So where we sit is in between in the battery storage ecosystem, right? You have like on one end you have residential, which is like homes, right? And on the other end you have utility scale, which is like huge battery storage projects in the middle of nowhere, like connecting to a utility. Those two extremes are where most of battery storage operates. That's a traditional way of thinking about how to use stationary storage, which is when you're using a battery, not in basically an EV. And what we do is we're taking mostly everything else. We're focused on everything in between the resi and the utility scale, which is like mostly it's commercial and industrial scale, which is buildings and hotels and schools and factories. And then it's these smaller front of meter projects, which means essentially small projects that are connected to a local utility. So not typically in the middle of nowhere. They're smaller, like 20 megawatt hours, which is like maybe 2 to 4 containers of batteries, and connected in like a city or an urban environment where you need to either balance the grid or they're having issues with electricity prices. And so that's kind of what we do is we serve that middle market because that middle market is the one that's the most underserved. and it's the hardest to actually get projects done. So resi technology and products are really easy. Utility scale, actually, believe it or not, are also, because they're only doing one thing. It's like on, off, and it's very clear about how to design those. These in between ones are much more technically complex because you're, for example, when you connect a battery to a building, you're dealing with all the needs of the building, plus you're dealing with the battery connected to the grid, plus you're dealing with typically having some kind of solar, maybe some backup generators. You're dealing with like data, electricity, like just so many different demands all at once. And so
Hmm.
it's just like the complexity factor goes way up, but the scale doesn't go up in linearly. It's so like, it might be 5 times the size or 10 times the size of a residential project, but it's 100 times as hard. So it's like most people stay away from it because it's just like the value. And then on the utility scale, same. It's actually more complex and smaller. So it's like, why would I even touch those
Hmm.
projects? But I think the interesting thing, that's where all the I think that's where all the untapped value is in this ecosystem. Like there's so many. That's where like everywhere you look, every building, every house, every school, every street light, everywhere you look in an urban environment is like ripe for battery storage. And it would solve so many problems if we were able to deploy it more seamlessly, safer, lower cost. And so now it's like a hardware problem, but it's also now it's like a soft cost problem, which basically means like the installation, the permitting, the
Yeah.
paperwork, the even the labor and things like that, like all the stuff that goes around that has nothing to do with the actual batteries themselves. That's really where there's the next wave. Like batteries going to keep getting cheaper and cheaper and cheaper, and technology is going to keep getting better and better on a nice curve. And if you look at the curve, it's unbelievable to see how fast it's happened, even faster than solar in terms of the cost curve, like cost coming down. And solar happened at like an insane, never before
Yeah.
seen speed. And so the cool thing is, it's like, yeah, batteries we're starting to see that happen. And now it's the soft cost piece, which is like the next wave where if we can get that part easier, and which really what GridVest is trying to do, that's the market we're trying to serve, which is that mid market. It's because
Right.
think about it this way. Most of these developers are the guys who and gals who build the projects, right? So they're typically like 5 to 25 person companies, or sometimes even smaller, that are really, really, they have the hardest job, I think, on earth, because they are dealing with they're like the ones who are they're essentially their own entrepreneur. Like each project is like a startup. You set up your
Hmm.
own entity. You have to raise money for it. You have to get all the permitting. You have to get all the technical designs. You have to figure out the business plan. You have to get a customer, which is usually an off taker, right? Like a building owner or a utility. You have to then go get the hardware and supply. You have to figure out the technology. So it's like these developers are entrepreneurs, and they are usually really, really good at what they do, but they need help typically because they're small and they're like navigating a million things.
Right.
Hard for them to go buy a big, heavy, expensive equipment from like a large Chinese battery manufacturer, for example, because there's just so many challenges, time zones and cultural and financial. Like they need to write big checks up front, and then logistically, how do you navigate that and bring those to your site and then make sure those are the right batteries that are anyway. So there's a lot of there's just it's hard to kind of encapsulate how many little things that can go wrong in a project if you don't think about
Are there are there any competing solutions to not necessarily the specific,
it.
service that you guys are offering, but just batteries as a whole? Or is it really just either you're on board with the idea of a battery or not, and then it's just different
Yeah,
types of ways of being on that train?
good question. I think so. With regards to the battery side, I think there's not really alternatives. You're kind of like, for example, you can okay. There are some alternatives. Alternatives could be use solar only, right? And you don't use a battery. The downside is that you're limited. That will limit the size of the solar that you can use, the amount of solar you can use, and it won't work when the power goes out, the utility goes out, and economics of that project may be less. I think usually batteries help to increase the economics or improve the economics. Not always, but usually, depending on the utility rate structures and a number of things like that. Um, so that's one side, is like you could go without a battery. Then there's obviously the alternative of like there are alternative battery technologies, right? When I talk about batteries, I'm most often kind of referring to lithium iron phosphate (LFP), which is like the dominant formula for or chemical mix for
Mhm.
stationary storage. but there are a bunch of other non-LFP
Right.
battery options from like there's NMC, which is like another classic chemistry, which is mostly used for EVs. There's sodium ion is like the next wave that's coming, which is non-lithium, which is pretty cool. There's solid state batteries, which they're using for like electric flight and other kinds of like really power dense needs. There's zinc batteries for long duration. There's redox flow batteries. There's like so many cool different kinds. And then coming up advising Kinetic, they have a flywheel energy storage battery using kinetic energy. So like there's
Wow.
cool batteries,
That's
not all
interesting.
chemical. There's gravity based batteries. There's hydro. Anyway, so there's just an infinite number, and they're all really interesting.
Got it. Got it.
Serve a role. I think right now LFP though has become the solar PV of batteries because like there's a bunch of different kinds of solar technology too. There's solar thermal. There's different forms of PV. But solar PV, this traditional photovoltaic system that we use, has become the dominant, and it's been hard to disrupt, even with other technologies that have.
So
So yeah, so I don't know if that
yeah,
answers your question, but
no, no. So no, that was great. I think so. The just the last one on this because so interesting is are you of the opinion that there's no, because I am, that there's no evolution of the grid, there's no innovate that like where the grid needs to be to meet all of these new like if the economy is going to electrify, there is no evolution of the grid without batteries or optimizing battery storage.
yeah, I mean, I would say that is 100% true. I think there is. I mean, you could totally do it without batteries. It would just take a lot more time and a lot more money. So I
It'd
think
be a lot more inefficient.
we're a lot more inefficient. And I think the reality is like we just don't have that time and we don't have that money. Like if you could if you could like reset and you could redesign the whole utility grid from scratch, like you might be able to do it in a way where batteries aren't that needed. Because if you could, like for example, putting loads near generation, that's a good use, or figuring out ways to make a really smart grid where it's all connected, and then like when you need power, like it connects demand and supply better. But the reality is our grid is not designed like that. Our grid is aging. Our grid is, it's completely getting disrupted by AI data centers. And
Right, right,
the
right.
only thing, and I think the only thing you can realistically build in 1 or 2 years in the energy world is battery storage or solar, right now, like natural gas plants take multiple years.
Right.
Nuclear takes like 10 years. Hydro takes like 10 years, like 5 to 10 years. Like every energy source. I guess coal is. I don't even know if you can permanent coal anymore, but even if you could, it would still take multiple years. Um,
Okay.
every energy source is just takes forever, and except batteries are the one that you can actually deploy quickly. Again, paired with solar, and it really helps. And it solves the immediate pain points and reduces the amount that the utility actually needs to spend to upgrade their grid. That's the big thing people forget is like batteries. If the grid allows the utility uses batteries in the right way, it allows them to save money. The problem
Mm.
is that most utilities don't want to save money or don't care about spending less money because the more money they invest, the more money they can make back in a return
Right, right.
this invested
Sure.
capital. So they're not really incentivized to be efficient. But if they were like, hey, your incentive is to like be as efficient as possible, lower the cost of electricity as much as possible, then the logical thing would be like, all right, let's deploy batteries in these areas where there's more power demand and that can meet because batteries can cover the spikes of energy. It can cover the off hours of solar. It can
Right, right.
cover grid outages. It can provide backup power. It can help to kind of clean the grid, like when you have like these big frequency or voltage fluctuations. Like, so it just provides it solves so many problems altogether. So it's not
Got
a
it.
panacea. I'm not saying batteries are the answer to everything.
Right, right.
Like there are problems with batteries, right? The chemicals that go into them are not
Sure,
great.
sure, sure.
They're heavy and take a lot of energy to transport. There are risks of a battery fire in certain cases, but again, I think very low risk. But in terms of the tools we have in our toolbox, like to me, there's
Cool.
no easier option. There's no easier solution.
Appreciate that. Well, thank you for indulging my curiosity. So,
Yeah.
at the beginning, then, so with this middle that you identified, I mean, it's 3 years, 3 years into GridVest, you guys have identified this very clearly. You speak to
Yeah.
this middle. When you had started, I mean, and it's possible because you came from doing all of this research and from the policy perspective, did you have a clear vision of what this market was and how you're going to serve it, or has that changed in the last 3 years?
Yeah. Great question. And I think that ties together also the question about like who do we compete against or what's the alternatives for what we do? Because I think how we've evolved is definitely changed. Like there's been like two or three big leaps, but the first leap was we started just by like the hardest part when we started was just getting access to the equipment, like just finding the right Chinese battery manufacturer, getting like building the relationship with them, contracting with them, and getting a battery literally physically to this country. Like that was it. That was like what we did, and we were really good at it, right? We're sourcing experts, and then we also added this financing. We help you pay for it. But like those two things, that was it. Like we didn't do any. We just sold the battery, and that was it. We kind of not walked away, but like we kind of were like, all right, here's your battery. But then the reality of like, okay, next wave comes, and it's like, uh-oh, batteries are hard. We need more. We don't just need a battery. We need an inverter. We need an energy management system. We need the whole package. And so that was the next wave of GridVest of like, okay, now we can't just sell a battery. We need to help sell a solution. And then
Mm.
the third, and then
When was that?
so that was probably like, pretty early on, but like into
Okay, okay.
2024, like after our first year, we were just like selling hardware or just sell
Okay.
batteries. And then we're like, okay, if we're actually going to grow this thing, we have to like, we can't just sell batteries. Like these customers need solutions. They need actual, like,
Yeah.
full, it's
It
got
just
to
seems like
work.
a decently significant pivot to make, you know?
Yeah, and it was, and that was still part of our learning and growth, but it was also part of where the market was. Like people didn't
Right.
know what they needed. They were like, "I just need a battery. Get me a battery." And I'm like, "Oh, here, I'll sell you a battery." And so, but then people realized even, because most people in this industry are solar experts who then kind of add in batteries, right? They're like, I know everything about solar, but then I'm like, yeah, but you, and so they think they know everything about batteries, but then the problem is that batteries are just technically more complex and there's more
Sure.
variables to figure out. So that's where we pivoted. Yeah, in 2024, I'd say to be kind of more of a full solution oriented, where like the whole package, and becoming more technically involved too. We started like actually providing commissioning services and supporting on like after sales, because like initially it was like our manufacturers would do all of that, but we realized like if we want to, what these companies are mostly, again, that time were mostly Chinese companies, they need help managing all of that, and our customers don't really want to have to be going to a Chinese company to be getting support. So we're starting to become more of like a full, again, end-to-end side of the battery's life cycle. And then the last pivot, which we're just still going through, and it's been a really
Yeah.
crazy evolution, and this is just the nature of doing business in the Trump era and the renewable energy, is having this whole foreign entity of concern thing that just happened. So
Sure.
basically, with the one big beautiful bill that came out last year, first of all, we had tariffs, which were crazy, right? And we helped people navigate the tariffs, and that was wild. But the even more complex thing is the changes that happened with the tax credit and renewable. And so what the big change was is that essentially, if you want to get the tax credit, the investment tax credit, which is a 30% rebate on renewable energy, solar, and also on batteries, um, that you have to use uh, battery equipment from a not from a foreign entity of concern, which is basically any entity from China, Russia, I believe North Korea, and Iran. So most batteries are owned manufacturers are Chinese companies. So that created a huge complexity. Like, how do you either kind of have to decide, do you work with a Chinese battery, or do you go without the tax credit? Like if you work with a Chinese battery, you have to do it without the tax credit. Or if you go with the tax credit, you have to find a non-Chinese battery to work. So there are very few out there. There's some Korean manufacturers. There are a few emerging American manufacturers, but very, very limited supply.
Mm.
So the supply has already been taken by like the residential and the utility scale market, as
Sure.
I was talking about earlier. So it's been a huge pivot for us because we've had to pivot away. Just our whole specialty was built around China sourcing, where most of the best tier one manufacturers are. But now we've added in a whole range of non-Chinese options, from Korean manufacturers to now again emerging American manufacturers to American integrators who are buying Chinese battery cells and integrating them in the U.S. And so it's been a big journey of like just the last year has been adding a ton of new battery manufacturers, figuring out new technologies, figuring out who has what where, basically. That's ultimately
Yeah.
the hardest challenge because these things are happening every month. It's like a new battery factory plant opens up next month. Battery factory plant closes up. Like this company
Yeah.
merged with this company. This company is going to come out with this new product. And then, and the last thing that's happening is at the same time, the UL, the Underwriter Laboratory, is coming out
Mhm.
with all kinds of new safety certifications. And so each year, essentially the edition changes. Now they just came out with edition 6, which completely rewrites the rules. And there's all these new large scale fire testing where you actually have to ignite a battery system, like literally like blow it up and see how it performs. And so now it's like there's a whole new world of testing these batteries have to go through, and so we're just helping navigate that, and it's hard, and it's been
Yeah.
another pivot because like that pivot has been like, now we're not just this China sourcing expert, we're having to source from the whole world, and we're
Right.
having to be able to not just build around 3 or 4 companies, we're having to have like 12 to 15 companies that we now are sourcing from and working with, and so that's been a big evolution, as we've then kind of gotten more sophisticated with our
Yeah.
technical side. So I hope that's the I hope we can stick with that for a while. We don't have to,
Yeah.
but who knows? I mean, policies are going to change fast. Like, I don't know what's going to
Yeah.
happen with the next administration. It's going to be very interesting. And these projects typically are planned in like it takes at least about 2 years typically for a project. So like whatever people are starting to do now is not really going to get built till 2028 or so. So, it could be even 2029 in some cases. Maybe
Yeah.
you could do some quicker than that. But like, so they're already, so really actually you do have to start thinking about what's going to happen in the next administration and how to make the economics work.
Well, so with within that environment. So first of all, thank you for walking through that because it is fascinating to think about. Now I'm going to ask you within that context of how you guys are operating.
Yeah.
Two questions. The first is how are you approaching growth? Most specifically, you mentioned working with, large like factories or like large real estate developers or these types of. What's your experience selling into these segments of that middle that you describe with all of this complexity that you just
Yeah.
went through?
Um, well, I'd say that there's two, I guess, main buckets. I mean, one is like the off takers, the ones who are the end users, the ones who are actually going to use the batteries. And then there's others who are like the intermediaries who are like building the projects, or the construction companies or the installers or the developers. So I think with like the installer bucket, the ones who are actually building, like what's changed for them is again, just like they're also having to rewrite their sourcing and procurement approach. And I think economics have been really hard to figure out because they're having to model out scenarios that they don't really that are really a little bit unsure. Like modeling, first of all, the big one is modeling it without the ITC, which I think is actually the future. I'm actually a big proponent of developing projects without needing to rely on investment tax credit, because that means if you can get away from needing that to make your project economic, now these projects can make a lot more sense. Like
Mm,
they're a lot easier to scale because the paperwork of tax credits is very complicated. You typically need insurance which is expensive. There's a lot of limitations if you're going to use tax credits, even though they're really attractive too, economically. So, but I think as we get away from tax credits for needing these projects to become economic, that's going to open up so many opportunities. And that's what happened in China too. Like when solar subsidies went away, nothing happened for like a year. Everyone kind of was crying and upset, and oh my God, how are we gonna make these projects work? And then the price of solar went down, and people figured out how to make it work. And all of a sudden, now all these projects that were never going to be built before are now happening. And unsubsidized solar became, just China has completely, boomed since that in terms
right.
of solar. And so I think the same thing is going to happen in storage. It's going to be like this year and next year are going to be a little like of a weird gear shift where it's like, oh no, tax credits. And is it worth trying to, hold on to them and buy from like non-Chinese battery manufacturers? And then but at some point it's going to go back into this world of like the equipment's coming down in price so much and the technology is improving so much. It's just going to be like a matter of time before a lot of more projects get unlocked. So back to your question though, the real estate developer side, the end user side, like I think also they're facing the biggest challenge, which is their electricity bills are going way up. Like they don't know why, they don't know how to fix it, but they know that like their electricity bills, which tends to be a very large percentage of a commercial or industrial buildings, like overall business, is going way up, like 10%, 20%, sometimes 30% a year. And I think that's not going to slow down for the near term with all of the new data centers coming online. So what do you do when your biggest line item, your biggest expense has now gone up 30% and you have no essentially ability to slow that down? And oftentimes because of computing demands and others, like and EV charging and things like that, like your electricity usage is probably going up a bit as well. So now that because we've electrified everything, and so you're in this like perfect storm of like, I don't know. Most of the real estate developers and building owners are like, I don't know how, but I need to lower my bill. And batteries in California in particular, like demand charges are one of the most expensive parts of electricity bill. And that means essentially if you use demand charges, your whole electricity tariff changes if you go above using a certain amount of electricity, even for like a second. So anytime if you spike to like, if you use normally like, I don't know, 1 megawatt and you go to
Mm-hmm.
1.1 megawatts, now you're at a new tariff. And so you have to, like, the battery prevents that spike. And so that allows you to stay at a lower tariff. And that's one of the biggest ways to make that projects economic and help these developers and building owners save money. So
Are you finding that people are receptive to this type of thing, or are you finding resistance to these ideas? People are like, thank you, but I don't know, or are people like, yes, this is relevant.
it's a good question. I'd say, like, interested, always interested. No, especially if you're like, hey, I can save you money. Everyone's interested. I think the reality gets scary for people. The reality of, like, what does this mean? How much money am I gonna have to spend up front? What are the technical risks? How long is this gonna take? I think there's like people, especially in the real estate game or building owners or business owners. Obviously, it's short-term mindset, right? Like, I don't have it's, and a lot of times it's about resource, energy, and resources, not even just about money. It's like, I don't have the bandwidth to manage this, or I don't know. Like, this seems like complex and it's changing a lot. Like, I don't know how to deal with it. So there is a lot of that going on, and I think that's where there is education that's needed, is like, look, showing you, here's all these other projects who are doing it. Here's how the economics that work for them. Here's some ways that we can help you de-risk it. Here's some ways that we can help you finance it so you don't have to come out so
Right.
much out of pocket. So there's like definitely an education curve, and it's a really
Okay.
yeah. And I think what's going to happen is, again, is like, once you start seeing everyone else do it, it becomes very easy
Right.
and very obvious. And that's what happened with solar. That's what will continue to happen, I think, in batteries. Um, and what I think is needed is, or what will happen, I think, is people are going to be forced into this, because they're, at some point, they're going to become so desperate from electricity bill reprieve, and it's
Yeah.
not going to come anytime soon. So this is going to be something that's going to they're going to have to do. And the cool thing is, last thing I'll say is, there's like more third party options. So you don't have to actually even pay for it yourself. Like, you could bring in a third party owned developer, or someone who's doing like energy as a service. They could pay for the whole system, and then you just get the savings, or some of that share the savings with them, or get a discount on your electricity. Or there's a million ways to solve for this if you
Hmm.
don't want to necessarily deal with it or take the risk yourselves as like a building owner.
So, either pulling from the experience that you're having right now with GridVest, with this, with this educational curve, with selling into these pocket of buyers, or pulling from any experience you've had entering markets in the past, is there a single thing, two things, however you want to take it, that you would say influences you or your growth strategy, go to market strategy right now? That if you were speaking to, a room full of people that were, doing similar work, I guess, in different industries, so they're not competing with you. But, is there anything impactful that you'd pull from your experience that you'd say is really important that you've learned about growing in this way?
Um, yeah, I think, like, general advice of and like what I've learned is the value of being nimble. I think the value of being, like, really looking around, and not being not getting like hung up on what you've already done. It's like, oh, we did this and it worked. It's like, yeah, I know it did this and it worked. But being really focused on what's coming next. Like, I think you all in this industry, or any industry really, but especially in just entrepreneurship in general, I think it's so important, with the world changing as fast as it is, that you're spending like a percentage of your time, I don't know what percent, maybe 30%, 20%, really planning for like what's coming next.
Yeah.
Because I do think it's really easy to just stick with what's working now, and then all of a sudden you can find yourself like, uh-oh, like, the little well we found of water is now dried up, and we didn't plan for the next well yet. And so I think that's something that I just, whether it's in entrepreneurship or in different industries, I think is so important, and more so now than ever, because of the fast speed of change. And I think AI is going to only accelerate that. Um, and I think it will just help to keep us as people relevant. Like, even in your individual career journey, I would say that's a good useful thing to do. And I think when it comes to starting a business, that is definitely something that's helped me. And the last thing is, like, part of that is like following the curve. Like, just trust the curve, even if it's like crazy, if it doesn't seem like it's possible. You're like, just, I mean, historical data is a very, very helpful, not perfect, but helpful indicator of what's to come. And like, if you can look at like this and you extrapolate it out, and you can do some very quick math as to, like, okay, at these different growth rates, at the low, medium, and high, what does this mean? Like, you can I think, have a pretty good sense of where things are going. Like, these little trends with solar and batteries and whatever, like, by the time I got involved with them, for me it was obvious. But most people around me did not see the obvious, didn't think it was obvious. And I think that's often, I think, what's the magic of the entrepreneur mindset or journey, is like being
Mhm.
able to believe that yourself and your data and your analysis enough that you can tell all these other people who are saying, I don't know, is it really going to happen? Is it going to happen
Yeah.
fast? Like what people would say about AI 2 or 3 years ago, or autonomous vehicles, 5 years ago, or name your technology. It's just like, I don't know, is it really going to happen that fast? And then all of a sudden it does, sometimes even faster. And then,
Yeah.
but I think that like the people who were saying that weren't like some magic geniuses who saw magic. No, they just like they trusted the information they had, and they believed their intuition a bit, but they were like,
Mm.
it wasn't coming from nowhere. It wasn't like they're just soothsayers.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's there. Like I can tell you the next. I bet if we were like, if we were to look out 4 years from now, like I don't know what the world is going to be like at all, but
Right.
some trends that I'd be willing to put some money behind and bet on
Yeah. Yeah.
based on those curves. So anyway, that's hopefully something to think
Well,
about.
GridVest is one of those.
Yeah, there you go. Exactly.
So I got, yeah. So I got two final questions for you. My first one is, as far as, and you already spoke to the educational resistance you're feeling, so it's cool if that's the answer. But as far as growth goes, as far as entering this market, what is the biggest hurdle that you're facing, and how is it also an opportunity?
Yeah. I think biggest hurdle is, um, yeah, I do think it's back to what I said earlier about this foreign entity of concern, this policy change around tax credits.
Cool. Cool.
What does this look like for batteries going forward? And I think the opportunity um, is actually allowing us to become a better, like more all-encompassing sourcing solution, which is it's kind of where we needed to go ultimately, but it just is forcing us to do it a lot quicker than we would have otherwise. Like we were going to go this
Cool.
direction and start adding in all these different manufacturers and doing a more full service solution. Like that was already kind of my vision, but I just didn't think it would be needed this quickly. And so it's forcing us to grow up and be who we wanted to be anyway. And I think I think other industries are probably finding that they're in the same boat of like they're having to be a little bit more who they were planning to be, but having to do it sooner in order to be
Yeah.
able to play in this ecosystem again, especially with the speed of growth and with AI. So
Great.
that's yeah, that's my answer.
Awesome. Well, with the my last question, with all this work to be done, all this opportunity in front of you, what inspires you?
Yeah, I mean, well, first of all, I want to just acknowledge that like it's definitely a wild time in the world, and it is sometimes
Yeah.
like I've noticed myself in the last year or two. The first times I've noticed like getting I'd always been pretty optimistic, excited, believer in humanity. First times where I've started getting like questioning things, I'm like, I don't know, like this is getting really wild, and I'm getting like a little scared at times, and I don't know
Sure.
where things are gonna head from here, and it's slippery slope, and yada yada yada. Like I can see how the doom spiral in my head can start. But I guess my what I would say to myself and also to others is just um, trust the process, and like just know that this is the cost of progress, like 2 steps forward, 1 step back. Like we made a lot of progress in the last, I don't know, I think of especially like in the early 2000s and mid 2000s and like there's a lot of amazing change that happened, and like this is a response. What is going on in the world now, I think, is somewhat of a response to that progress, or like a reaction to that progress. And so
Mhm.
my response is like, let's just keep focused on like making the world a little better, like being a little nicer to each other, and solving real problems. And I think we'll get ourselves out of this hole that we've dug, um, both in the U.S. and around the world. And I hope that we all can see ourselves as little change makers in that journey.
Yeah.
And
Cool. Well, if anyone else is
take a
inspired to
big
follow
bet.
along, yes. If anyone else is inspired to follow along or get in touch, what's the best way to do it?
Best way to do it is probably find me on LinkedIn. Alex Shore, I'm the only one out there. Follow me. Feel free to
Nice.
connect with me. Send me a note as to why you want to connect. But I'm definitely a big LinkedIn fan these days. And yeah, I'll be publishing some papers and articles on these topics soon. So, or I have a few out already, but I'm going to be writing more about it. And Blake, you may have inspired me to even start my own podcast, as everyone has
As you
me very on
should.
trend, So I feel like there's so many things I want to talk about in energy. So why not have an excuse to do it?
Yeah, good. Well, I'm glad, Alex. So thank you. Wow, I'm looking forward to the next one, whether it's on yours or mine.
Awesome. Awesome. Thanks for having me.
All
It's
right.
been really good to talk to you, and I love what you're doing here.
Thanks, man. You too. Talk to you.